A woman and her 2 young children vanished without a trace. The strangest part was that the father, Chris Watts, seemed like the last person responsible for these disappearances. Shanann Watts lived in a quiet suburb of Colorado, was a devoted family member, active on social media. She and her husband Chris had 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. Shanann frequently gushed about how perfect her family was and shared her love for her husband on social media. But behind this image of a perfect life lay a storm approaching silently. On the morning of August 13, 2018, Shanann's close friend Nicole became concerned when she hadn't heard from her. The car was still in the garage. Shanann's phone was found in the house, and the door was unlocked, all signs that something was wrong. Nicole called the police. Shortly thereafter, officers arrived and investigated. That's when everything began to unravel. Those first minutes captured on police security cameras. Chris's reactions, the silence and coldness inside the house. Everything was so strange. Chris had just returned from work at the time. He was stunned to learn that his wife and children had disappeared. The police asked questions, toured the house, even searched the garage and basement. But Chris's behavior, his cool demeanor, and his unemotional demeanor had become striking. He lacked the panic or fear that would normally be felt by a husband or father of 2 missing young children. It was as if he were observing the events from the outside. The next day, Chris appeared on television and addressed his family. With a tearful expression, he pleaded for Shanann and his daughter's return. But this footage had begun to convey something else in the eyes of both the police and the public. A charade, a mask, a fake performance. Because deep down, everyone was asking the same question. Is this man truly experiencing his family's disappearance, or is he the one behind it? Chris's inner circle was also perplexed. They had always known her as a quiet, reserved, and calm person. No tantrums, no arguments, nothing. But sometimes the calmest-looking people carry the biggest storms within them. The police's initial investigation didn't yet yield any definitive evidence, but there were some striking details. The door hadn't been forced. There were no signs of a struggle inside. Shanann's belongings were in place. Her wallet, keys, and phone were all there. It was as if she hadn't left for anywhere, just vanished into thin air. It was unreasonable for such a well-organized woman to leave the house without any preparation. Neighbors' security cameras were examined, and that footage completely changed the course of the case. A camera looking at the neighbor's house showed Chris carrying something to his car very early that morning. Large garbage bags, a mysterious silence, and the early hours of the morning. Chris's account and the footage didn't match. With each passing minute, questions grew. Chris maintained his silence in the early days, but the case escalated, the media got involved, and detectives began to dig into the details. At this point, no one knew what had happened to Shanann and the children, but everyone was now certain of one thing. This was no ordinary disappearance, and it was at this point that the most unexpected turning point in this story would occur. By the way, if you've watched this far and enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe. Subscription doesn't cost anything, my friend. Smash that button. Chris remained calm in front of the police. It was as if he were observing the proceedings from the outside. The detectives noted his calmness. Several days had passed since the missing persons report, but there was still no sign of Shanann, Bella, or Celeste. The police were racing against time. With each passing hour, hopes dwindled further. As the investigation deepened, detectives began to track Chris's movements step by step. First, they examined his cell phone records. Then, they scrutinized security cameras at his workplace, bank activity, text message history, and GPS data. But the most important clue would come from Chris himself. The detectives interrogated Chris. The initial interrogation was gentle. He was a father who had lost his wife and children. At least that's how it appeared. But after a while, Chris's answers began to conflict. His words and actions were inconsistent. He gave short, careful answers to every question. It was as if it had been memorized. Instead of confronting him directly, the detectives tried to decipher Chris's emotional state. They empathized with him, trying to gain his trust. Because in these cases, pressure doesn't always work. Criminals sometimes only speak when they feel understood. Things changed in the second interrogation. Chris was offered a polygraph test, a lie detector test. He agreed. The test results clearly showed Chris was lying. The examiner presented the results to him and stated firmly, "You failed the test." That's when Chris's wall cracked. He was now struggling to control his lies. However, he still didn't directly confess to the murders. Instead, he tried to pin the blame on Shanann. He told the detectives that Shanann had killed the children, and that was why he had killed her. In other words, he tried to portray the incident as a sudden outburst of anger. But this narrative was unconvincing on many levels. The timeline, the security camera footage, the physical evidence, none of it matched Chris's new scenario. The detectives took note of his version, but they also made it clear they knew the truth. At this point, another name came into play, Chris's father. Before leaving Chris alone in the interrogation room, the detectives brought his father in. It was a strategic move. They brought in the person Chris felt most comfortable with, and it worked. Chris quietly whispered to his father, "I killed them." With this sentence, the situation took a completely different turn. It wasn't a missing persons case, but a murder case that began to unravel with a confession. Chris didn't tell everything at once. He spoke in pieces. First, he admitted to killing Shanann. Then he revealed where he had taken the children's bodies, but he still wouldn't tell everything outright. Even these fragmented confessions were invaluable to the police. According to Chris, he buried the bodies in large tanks and in the ground at the oil field where he worked. That night, he wrapped the children's bodies in blankets, placed them in the back of his car, and took Shanann's body with him. He set off early in the morning when no one was around. These details guided the police teams. And now came the moment everyone had been waiting for but dreading. Search teams found the bodies in the designated area. In this episode, the story had changed. We weren't facing a man who had lost his family, but a murderer who had destroyed them with his own hands. Chris's composure showed that he had been contemplating this plan for a long time. This wasn't a moment of anger, but a deliberate preparation. With all these developments, the investigation was nearing its final stages. Now it was time for the trial and sentencing, but many questions remained unanswered in the minds of the public, the media, and the detectives. Why did Chris do this? Why did he kill his family? And most importantly, was there really something else behind this plan? Following Chris's confession, police immediately took action. A search was launched based on the locations he provided. 3 bodies were soon found in the oil field. Shanann had been buried in the ground. Her young daughters, Bella and Celeste, had been thrown into massive oil tanks. The location, shape, and condition of the bodies revealed the brutality and orchestration of the incident. Now all that remained was for the official proceedings to begin. While Chris was in custody, the media focused on the incident. It generated widespread national outcry. The fact that such a quiet man could do such a thing shocked everyone. When the trial began, the courtrooms were packed. Everyone wondered what punishment this man would receive. The prosecutor dropped the death penalty after Chris pleaded guilty. This decision was supported by Shanann's family. They believed that Chris's death, rather than his lifelong suffering, was a more severe punishment. When he appeared in court, Chris pleaded guilty to the charges. He neither offered a defense nor he tried to explain. All he said was, "I'm sorry." The judge sentenced Chris to 3 consecutive life sentences. He also received additional sentences for killing his children and hiding the bodies. He was sent to prison with no parole under any circumstances. He is currently being held in a maximum security prison in Colorado. He will never see the outside world again for the rest of his life. The Chris Watts case demonstrated how dark a person can be, how easily even those closest to him can conceal what they hide. His calmness, his silence, and the blank expression on his face masked a profound darkness. And only one question remained. Did no one really notice? This story isn't just a murder, it's also a warning. Perhaps those who remain the quietest are the ones who need to speak the most. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe and like it. Share your thoughts in the comments so we can chat. See you in another video. Goodbye.